Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Reed Summers, and I'm here with my father, Marshall Vian Summers. And we're here to share together a conversation with you about the nature of contact with extraterrestrial life, which is underway in our world today. And in our conversation, we're going to be talking about what this means for each of us individually, and also what we can do, both collectively and personally in our own lives about this. So for those just joining us, for the first time, you'll be hearing some very new information today. We'll do a little bit to get you caught up, but otherwise you might want to go back and watch some of our prior broadcasts, which really describe the nature of contact, who's in our world, what they're doing more extensively. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to be taking audience questions throughout today's broadcast, so please use the live chat or the comment section wherever you're watching to share a question with me. And I will field that, and Marshall and I will give that our best response. And I also want to say that much of what we'll be sharing with you today comes from a set of briefings called the Allies of Humanity briefings, which are available online, as well as a set of revelations about life in the universe received by Marshall, who's with us today. So thank you, Marshall. Happy to share this conversation with you.
Great, good to be here.
Introduce yourself to those viewing.
Well, this is a very important subject for me, and I was never an enthusiast of ufology or UFOs, but my spiritual work opened up this panorama for me 40 years ago. And so over these 40 years, I have given this a large part of my focus without any preconceived notions. I was trying not to make this a good thing or a bad thing. Just what is it? What does it mean? Why is it happening? And what we need to do about it. This is going to require human response at some point. So during this 40-year period, I have prepared a comprehensive approach to understanding contact based upon these great resources that I have been given, and on a physical, mental, and a spiritual level. So I've received a set of briefings called the Allies of Humanity briefings, as you mentioned. They provide us, in very simple terms, a clear understanding of who is here, why they're here, what they're doing, and how we should respond to their presence. Which is very different from much of the conversation that's going on in the world today about contact, many of the ideas, beliefs, hopes, and desires, and so forth. So my work is founded upon this awareness and this preparation that I think is critical for us facing this new reality. We stand at the threshold of a universe full of intelligent life, of which we know literally nothing at all, except we can wisely assume that it is full of life, that there is a lot of life out there, and we are not really unknown in our local universe. So if you can accept those premises, then I think our conversation tonight could be really beneficial.
Good.
And interesting.
I think our conversation is most definitely premised on the idea that we are not alone in the universe and that we are not even alone in our own world. So contact has begun. And what we're going to try to do together is kind of flesh out the nature of that contact and what that means for us personally, which is a question and a topic that's not often discussed. You know, what does this mean for the average person on Earth? It's typically considered to be either an issue for governments or an issue for a certain select number of people, possibly abductees or contactees. But what we'd like to share is that contact has massive implications for every man, woman, and child alive in the world today. And we're going to get into some of that together. So I thought to start, though, it would be important to talk about the nature of contact itself. Who is in our world, why they're in our world, and what their activities are. And I'd like to share this passage to get this started here. This is from one of your many works. The last century, a new kind of visitor came to the world, unlike those who came before. Visitors seeking to establish themselves in the world as humanity gained greater global predominance and was able to establish global networks of trade and commerce, communications. So tell us about these visitors. Who is in our world and what are they doing?
Well, our visitors represent a non-military force, basically resource explorers. But resource explorers have big connections with larger nations abroad. They're in our world for a purpose, and they've been here in an active sense probably for the last 70 or 80 years, particularly since the advent of World War II and nuclear development of nuclear weapons. They remain hidden. They do not disclose who they are, why they're here, the nature of their activities, or their overall purpose in being here. But clearly, they're playing a kind of long game in being here. Okay, they're not just here to make something happen in the moment. They're here to build a presence and an influence over humanity that's very subtle, but very, very powerful. And they're doing this without the use of force. You know, we're still living in a Star Wars mentality here on Earth. We think the way nations engage with each other is through battles and vast wars and complex events like that. But really, the nature of influence is so much more powerful, and that in our region of space, according to the Allies of Humanity briefings, war has been really doesn't really exist much in our well-inhabited part of the universe, our local universe. And so we're now facing a hidden presence that's very powerful, very subtle in its dealings, but having a lot of impact on the people that it engages directly, a lot of impact on our military installations, even our nuclear launch facilities. So they're definitely interested in controlling power in the world. And people, of course, want to look at this as a hopeful thing. Well, they have incredible technology. They might be able to help us. We need that. They might be able to show us how to live in peace. We're not living in peace. We don't know how to live in peace. Maybe they can lead us to a kind of a higher level of existence in the universe, being that they're obviously advanced, at least technologically. But being advanced technologically has nothing to do with advanced spirituality or higher motives or ethics or intent.
We can see that in our own human societies.
Yes,
technology does not lead to
That's right.
higher ethics or higher spiritual accomplishments.
That's right.
So going back to this passage I read, it said that this last century a new kind of visitor came, which suggests that there were other kinds of visitors before.
Oh, yes.
And there's many theories about ancient forms of contact, and I think some of your work accounts for that. But the visitors in the world today are of a very different kind than were here, let's say, before World War II in the last hundreds of years.
Yes, that is correct. And it's very important to note that, because otherwise we think that they've been here the whole time, somehow playing a kind of serving us in the background. People like to assume that. It makes them feel very good about their presence. But the forces that are in the world today are really predatory. And in times before, the Earth being a vast, just an incredible hothouse of life in a universe of barren worlds. So there was lots of attempts to come here, collect samples from Earth, even at a very long period of time, to establish some kind of foothold in the world. But the world we live in poses a real challenge to visitors, particularly if they live in space or live in sterile environments for much of their existence. I mean, there are estimated to be 1,300,000 different kinds of infectious diseases that could make human beings sick. And
in the world.
In the world. That's an estimate by science today. They've only studied 30,000 of them. So the potential of infectious disease for a visitor that has no immunity to anything in the world is quite significant. And therefore, you can't really assume that they have medicine that can handle any kind of biological challenge like that. So being in the world is very, very difficult. That's why the images you see that are reported of aliens, and that we have seen some photographs of them, are probably outfits. They're not really who they are. We're not seeing their true existence because of the atmospheric problems they have and the exposure to biological agents, which is a very serious matter in space.
And yet these are not scientists. These are not researchers. No. These are not the spiritually enlightened coming to help us in our hour of need. These are commercial forces, as your work reveals.
And their primary interest is in the world itself. This is a very important point. They are not here for us. We'd like to think they are. We hope they are. They are not here for us. They're here for the world. This world is so valuable. When you think of the biological diversity and wealth of this world, the habitability of this world, I mean, they need us because they can't live in the world. So we are important to them because they would need us to help them have dominion over this planet.
Right.
So we are important, but they don't treat us as equals. And in all of the conversations I've had with abductees and people who've had direct contact, you know, we're treated in a very discriminating way. And so if you can understand they're here for the world, that changes the whole picture. Because many people assume they're here for us, therefore it's about our development and our well-being and our happiness and our safety and our elevation to elevate the race. If they're here for the world, none of that matters.
Yeah.
That's out of the picture. So I want to make this really important point because this gives you an opportunity to discern who they are in a whole different way. And you know, behavior demonstrates intent. We have been able to catalog their behavior for 80 years. Not totally their behavior, but how they operate on Earth, how they respond to human reactions, how they respond to human beings, how they use human
And
beings.
so here you're talking about the history of ufology,
Yes,
research into alien abduction,
yes,
animal mutilation, all of the phenomena associated
that's right.
with
And
contact.
they have a big investment in being here because the world is so valuable. It's not we are so valuable. I mean, you can imagine if they're a highly unified race, I don't mean they're a free race, but I mean they're highly united. They think in a group mind fashion. They're not a bunch of free-floating individuals, you know, free-willing individuals in space. They must look at our world as being very chaotic. And also, we've been broadcasting all of our violence, all of our degradation, all of our weaknesses out into space for over 100 years. I mean, to any discrete observer, they've been studying us for a long time. And it must not be a very good picture to them. We must look very chaotic. Perhaps they don't understand our deeper nature, our spiritual nature, our psychology, but our behavior is very evident. We're violent, we're unpredictable, we're emotional, which may be very strange to them.
And if there's any one consistent kind of finding in all of this research regarding human-alien interaction, it seems to be that studying us is one of their primary activities.
Yes.
They have been analyzing every aspect of human physiology, psychology, culture, religion, everything. And so, but what you're saying and what you advocate is that we look at this not as a grand research experiment, but as a research experiment with an end, with an agenda.
Of course.
And that's borne out by the other elements of their activity.
But we are only a part of that agenda, that purpose and that agenda. The primary thing is the world itself, the value of this world and what it contains. That's why the Earth has been visited probably for millennia, for biological resources, for exploration. I mean, native peoples have certainly given much testimony through their artwork and tradition about the presence of visitors in the world in many, many places, for many cultures. So they've been coming here periodically for a long time. But because the Earth is such a dangerous place for a foreign visitor, a highly technological visitor, to visit because of its biological hazard, that establishing any kind of base here is very, very difficult. And so this gives us a very much clearer understanding of their behavior. They want to understand us to the extent that they can influence us. It's all about influence. They need us to do what they want us to do. This is not about our freedom. This is not about becoming an elevated race in the universe. We're unruly, destructive tribes degrading a planet that's desired by others.
So this is the native analogy in
Yes.
Earth, which is when colonial powers discovered tribal societies in the Americas or in East Asia, and those societies were sitting on top of resources desired by resource-hungry powers.
And that's a very important analogy, but there's a difference here. We are actually degrading the value of this world. Its soils, its air, its water. We're actually destroying the world as its value.
And so that would be alongside the advent of nuclear
that wasn't
weapons.
happening during the colonial era.
Right.
The natives weren't really destroying their own environment. We are destroying our own environment. And we have the risk of destroying it even more through nuclear weapons and the kind of confrontations that are even going on in the world today, which are very concerning. So they want to make sure that we don't do that. But they need to use us in the way they want to use us. And people who have been taken against their will, who've been experimented upon, and we can talk about that a little bit today. I mean, they are being used, people are being used against their will. This is, you might treat this as you're being upgraded, or they're trying to help us or upgrade our, our biology or our mental capacities. We're just being used for experiments, basically, like lab animals.
Okay. So stepping back then, so contact is occurring in a way that it wasn't in more ancient times or over 80 years ago. So we're making contact with a different kind of extraterrestrial force with a different kind of agenda. And the arrival of this force was triggered by the advent of nuclear weapons, the degradation of our environment, the Great World Wars, which threaten the very planet that they're seeking, and us as a viable workforce. And so this is, in a sense, first contact with a colonizing force. And would you say that colonization is really their aim?
Yes. Why would they spend 80 years investing themselves in building a presence here if it wasn't for some kind of goal like that? I mean, if they were just visitors, they just visit and that would be it. But they're implanting themselves in our world out of our view. And you know, we as human beings, we're so consumed with the difficulty of our own lives, with the difficulties and struggles between nations, the challenge to our existence for many different things. We're very preoccupied. Very few people look up in the skies very often. So if something passes over, well, maybe a few people see it, maybe a few hundred people see it. But does everyone see it? No. We're not paying attention to our skies. But our skies have a lot of activity in them. And they can fly through our skies with impunity. We know that. They have technology that makes their craft immune to gravity and any kind of friction in our environment, even wind. However, their craft have also crashed. There have been many crash retrievals. And so they also have difficulty with our environment. And there's things unforeseen here that have caused these crashes. And craft have been taken, the occupants have been taken. It's been going on for decades.
And I think it's been established that these crash retrievals have generated a lot of the deep state secrecy that's gone on, not only in the United States, but other countries as well, which generates all the controversy about disclosure and the lack of disclosure. I'd like to pause here and come back to the alien presence itself and summarize what they are doing. Because I think those listening, they're trying to piece this together, but understanding these four elements of their activities would be very helpful. So this is a summary of the Allies of Humanity position on what they call the intervention, which is a visitation into our world by commercial forces who are exploring this planet for its resources and seeking to basically lay claim to it and to us. And so here we on screen have these four activities, and I'll just read through these. We don't have time to go into all of them today. We've done a lot of that in former broadcasts, but I encourage those who are new to dig in deeper. So the first is influencing certain individuals in positions of power and authority in government, commerce, and religion to cooperate with the intervention through the promise of greater wealth, power, and technology. We're going to get into this. We're going to get into this promise of wealth, power, and technology because it's not just for the leaders. It's also for us, the citizens. The allure is very powerful. Second, creating hidden establishments in the world from which the intervention can exert its influence in the mental environment, seeking to make people everywhere open and compliant to its will through a pacification program. And we'll also be talking more about the mental environment because that's a huge way that the intervention is impacting people. Third, manipulating our religious values and spiritual impulses in order to gain human allegiance to their cause. And lastly, taking people against their will and often without their awareness to support an interbreeding program designed to create a hybrid race and a new leadership that is bonded to the visitors. Wow.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
I mean, if you can really take that in and start to piece your own puzzle together through your own research and your own findings of what's been discovered about the phenomena, this complete picture of colonization is a difficult pill to swallow for people.
It is a very difficult pill. And you know, it's difficult not because it's such a disappointment to what we would think would be the opportunity. We're opportunists. Especially in countries that have never been invaded, they seem to be much more opportunistic in the way they look at this. When you talk to people in countries that have been colonized, and we've been to many of those countries, you'll often get a very different response. People say, oh, well, they're here to take over. Because that is, when there's intervention from, even in this case, more advanced societies on Earth, what's the outcome? They take over. They may take over violently, they may take over subtly, they may offer many incentives, they may seduce you, They may conquer you, but basically they're here to take over. But in the United States and perhaps Europe, well, Europe's been intervened in quite a bit, but we always think of opportunity. And for some people, if there's no opportunity, I don't even want to go there. Don't tell me this is a threat, or don't tell me this is something. I've spoken to many UFO conferences, and the predominant thrust of those conferences is that the intervention is beneficial. And people love it, and I see why they love it. The problem is it's not true, and there's nothing the intervention does to really demonstrate that. It's a narrative that's given to people that they encounter or that they take against their will. It's an expectation for many people, a hope, a desire. And this is where our spiritual values really get tapped into. Because the intervention may not really understand our religions, but they know that many people are very devoted, blindly devoted to certain aspects of religion, certain personas. So now the intervention wants to now associate you with Jesus. It wants to associate you with, spiritual important individuals or spiritual desires or spiritual inclinations by actually presenting themselves as a very advanced spiritual beings. But they don't behave that way in any way whatsoever.
So the vulnerability within us as individuals and as cultures, religions, societies is just enormous. I mean, the frontier, the view of the life in the universe as a frontier to be explored and exploited, that's a very, you could say, Western way of seeing. But there are other ways of seeing, and all of it can be exploited by the intervention.
That's right.
And unfortunately, as an isolated world, without having made other contact with other forms of intelligence, we haven't had to kind of do the checks and balances mentally, to make sure that our beliefs and our traditions are airtight and can't just be infiltrated and used against us. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. There's a question, several questions about what we've been talking about so far. The first is, how does Marshall know what the visitors are here for? Has he had contact with them? So how would you like to respond?
I know because of the contacts I have with another extraterrestrial force called the Allies of Humanity, who are off planet. They're telling us that we're not ready for contact. Nobody should be visiting our planet this time. We're way too warlike, we're way too immature. And if all those forces that were here in our planet actively are here to take advantage of our circumstances for their own purposes. And that we are easily seduced, we're easily affected. We don't know how to deal with this kind of presence. It's a very powerful mental presence and a very powerful physical presence. I mean, if they can make us think differently without impacting us even physically, that's powerful. That's power in the mental environment. Can you make people accept you by sheer the associations, the association with high technology, high intelligence? People associate then, and they had high spirituality. So people make these associations. And you can win people over very easily by doing that, particularly if they lose confidence in their own countries, their own leaders, their own institutions, the norms of life, which is happening today. Now people have a vacuum of confidence. Where are they going to place that confidence? Well, the intervention supports this process of disengaging with your culture, your history, what is most native about you as a human being. If that's possible, it's very possible in certain cultures that are now going through a lot of disassociation. People are disassociating from normal life. They're seeking alternative life. They're really very open and very vulnerable to this kind of persuasion which is present in the world today.
Yeah. Now, I know a big argument, I've heard it, I don't know how many times, is that if they wanted the world, they would have taken it already, right? If they wanted to destroy us and just make this their planet, they would have destroyed us and taken it over already. And so I feel like there's always that refrain that people would say, which is like, well, you can say they're here as an aggressor or they're here as an invader or colonist, but their presence is very subtle. You know, they don't seem to be steering the events of the world and making overt aggressive acts. But you know, part of the answer to that is, well, humanity is part of the resource. The global commercial structures, the communication structures we have is part of what they want, and so they're not going to destroy what they want. They're playing a long game, you know, as we've talked about before. to slowly and subtly infiltrate and through this program of hybridization plant or weave themselves into the fabric of humanity in such a way that we won't even know that they're here, possibly.
That's right.
So,
well, I want to address something you said, because it's very important to decide this polarity between they're here to be our friends or they're here to attack us. That's very illogical, by the way, because it discounts all the possibilities in between. The fact that they want to preserve the value of the world, they're non-military, they're not going to come here and take it by force. That would destroy the value of the world, might destroy us as a workforce. They're playing a long game because they're greatly outnumbered. Their numbers are small, and we control the ground. They may have dominance in the air, the skies. We control the ground. Okay, they can't physically take us by force. Okay, so it's all allurement. You see, this is power in the universe. The power in the universe is not blowing up planets and overtaking people and crushing them. It's winning over access to planets or any kind of resource in the universe through guile, through persuasion, through power in this mental environment. That's power in the universe, okay? Because if it's all warfare, the nations destroy themselves eventually. They actually, and many, of course, nations in the universe have probably destroyed themselves from ongoing warfare. Just like we're doing right now. We're destroying ourselves slowly through ongoing warfare. And that's happening at this very moment. So I think it's very important to see that they are not thinking like us. They are not brutish. They are not impatient. They know what they want. They see how they can achieve it, possibly, if we are acquiescent. The question is if we are acquiescent. If we are not acquiescent, then they cannot achieve those goals.
We're going to talk about that acquiescing and how to step out of that trend of thinking. Interesting, though, I think what you're advocating is really to not be stuck in this good ET, bad ET dichotomy. They're all here for the bad, they're all here for the good, demons, angels, or whatever. Really, it's to look at the universe as an extension of nature. So there are competing forms of life, competing for territory in space, resources in a universe of barren worlds, as you say. And that is competition for the ability to live, the ability to be preeminent in an environment. And so we're experiencing nature. Yes. Right, and up there in the universe is everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, but it's not all the good either. It's not all enlightened worlds that have transcended war and they're at peace and they're going to bring it to us. That's illogical, an illogical first assumption to make, and probably a very dangerous one as the natives being discovered.
Well, we are the natives being discovered, and if we but look at the history of intervention in our world over the past few centuries, of more powerful, more advanced societies overtaking native societies for resources. The game is resources, okay? Planetary exploration is for resources. You don't spend 80 years investing in a planet because you're so fascinated with them, you just want to be here. That's okay. We have to get over this notion that we are that important in the universe. We are damaging a world valued by others. And they're going to assume if we can't manage it ourselves, we shouldn't manage it. It's not we should be annihilated, but we shouldn't manage it. And so we have competition now. The intervention is competition. They're not evil. They're not devils, okay? There are enemies in the sense that they're here to take what we have, and we'll lose our freedom in the process, most assuredly. But they can only do it through subtle and guile means, because the use of force would destroy the value of the world, would set the entire world of humanity against them, which they do not want. They would not achieve their goals. And there's other reasons that are really interesting. The teaching on life in the universe says that in our region of space, outright conquest is not allowed. If you want to gain predominance in another world, you have to do it with if not the agreement of the native peoples, without the resistance of the native peoples. Those are the guidelines. I didn't make this up.
So there are rules of engagement.
There are rules of engagement that they do have to follow. So of course, they take a lot of exceptional things to that, but they're here operating to build something for the future for them here. And this is a very big thing. This is what it means to emerge into a universe full of intelligent life. We are not important in that universe. We don't matter in that universe, we human beings.
Which is a shock to our
Which,
values and our
well,
beliefs
that's
about
because,
ourselves.
but as a native, as an isolated race in the universe, you would of course think you're super important. That God is all about you. The idea with God of a greater community of life in the universe, wow, that's a different kind of God. That's a theology of the universe, which we do not have here on Earth. So now we have to deal with the big picture that's awesome, and we don't really even know how to prepare. One of the problems that we have with understanding contact is we don't know what life is like beyond our borders. We project fanciful notions, or we project terrible, horrible notions, or we project Star Wars notions or Star Trek notions, which is fanciful, but has nothing to do with reality. The fact is that advanced nations need resources, very unique resources. And everyone in the universe is looking for resources, unless they're very small and very isolated and very self-sufficient. But nations that interact with each other need resources, and they need to find access to resources. So it's a competitive environment on a scale that's just unimaginable. But it's like life here on Earth, except it's happening on a vast, incomprehensible scale with vast numbers of players. And we're just the little kids on the block. We haven't hardly even gone out into our backyard in the universe, let alone out into the real universe. So I think this is, what I'm presenting is kind of a preparation for the realities of life in the universe. And we're being confronted with this reality because we're facing intervention. It's not a visitation. We didn't invite them here. They're not declaring who they are. They're not asking permission to be here. They're just establishing themselves here. And we had nothing to say about it. That's intervention. If you call it something else, you're dreaming, you're in fantasy about what this is. But this is a very tough pill to swallow. And it's shock. Because here we are on Earth facing this reality. But the benefit to us is the only thing that's going to stop war in this world is getting prepared for the greater community. The only thing that will stop nations from fighting each other is realizing we have a common competitor or adversary setting up establishment here on Earth. We will stop fighting each other if we know we have to protect ourselves from the universe itself. That's a good thing. Nothing else, I don't think, is going to do it. We're not going to agree on resources. We're going to compete for resources. We're not going to agree on religion. We compete over religion. But if we're all facing a common hazard from the universe itself, that can actually redeem us and enable us to outgrow our history, our tendency towards war and conflict. Not because it's a moral thing to do necessarily, but because it's survival to do that. We're not going to make it if we're a warring group of tribes here on a planet that's desired by others.
We're being outcompeted in our native environment by another life form.
That's right.
And lest we think, well, let them win, or we're not worth it, or look what humans have done, I wouldn't think that they would do a whole lot better over time. I mean, let's make it clear that they're here to exploit the resources of the world too,
right,
over a long period.
And living under them would be worse than living under anything you can imagine ever happening in this world. Yeah. They would probably reduce the human population by a significant amount in order to make it more manageable. I mean, you don't want to go there.
Right.
I mean, so
it'd be like suddenly waking up.
What I'm presenting is challenge, hazard, and opportunity. But you got to get the opportunity, because if we don't grow up in the universe, we're going to lose our freedom. We're going to lose our world. Okay, that's a fact. What we're doing, the way we live, the way we compete with each other, the way we outstrip the world of resources is definite path to failure. And it's a definite invitation for intervention, which is exactly why it's happening now. Intervention is not happening 100 years ago. It's happening now. Why? We built an infrastructure they can use. We've built trade. We built commerce. We built everything. We built it for ourselves, but much of it they can use for themselves with us as a workforce.
So it seems we've crossed a hidden, like a tipping point without knowing it.
Right.
And that precipitated a new kind of visitor in our world and a whole new set of activities, which are very dark when you look into them. So good. So we're going to move on and now talk about, with those watching, thanks for being with us, what does this mean for them? What does this mean for the person who's kind of waking up to this reality and getting this cold bucket of water, splashed in their face. And I'd like to invite those watching to just take a moment and do a little personal reflection for themselves. And ask yourself, where do you stand right now with contact? So for those viewing, ask yourself this question. Is this a hopeful thing for you? Is it a scary thing for you? Is it shocking? Is it an of course, you've known it forever? Just where do you stand? Because when you know where you stand, you can know how to respond from this moment going forward. So as we talk, I invite our viewers to do that. And again, you can ask us questions about this topic in the chat or the live stream, wherever you're watching. So I'd like to put up on screen the 4 areas of life that we're going to be talking about. How is contact impacting people physically? How is it impacting them mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? So this is kind of our arena to look at together. And I think it's worth starting with the physical, practical one first, because the truth is ET forces are taking people against their will and exposing them to terrible experiments, violating their personal sovereignty, the sovereignty of their body, and in some cases not returning them
That's right.
at all or in good health. So a massive physical impact on an unknown number of people in the world. Could be millions who are being impacted by the intervention in this way.
That's right.
And so for any of us who are inclined to still hold out for that hopeful view that maybe we just don't understand, maybe there's a higher plan, maybe these abductions are an upgrade, or maybe it could be something good, it might be time to question why you keep holding on. Keep holding on, keep holding on.
Yeah.
And putting out that what if they're here for the good? Well, because look at the physical impact on people. And the abduction reality has been very thoroughly researched. And it's very dark.
And it paints a picture of people who have really been violated. Their freedom has really been stripped, part of their freedom, because now they can be taken at any time, under any circumstances, and face anything that their abductors want to do to them. And so the psychological damage of that, the trauma of that, the fear and uncertainty around that is something that's unimaginable. I mean, it's really a form of rape, if you will. And people don't want to deal with, who are interested in UFOs and visitation, they don't want to deal with this. They want to make it sound like, well, they're being enhanced. They're enhancing our biological code, or they're infusing us with their intelligence. But abductees from around the world who have been able to recover their memory, because their memory is blocked out or shielded as part of their experience of their abduction, are delivering the same kind of story of capture, of being exposed to certain kinds of common things. So it's not like everyone has a different story. The story is pretty commensurate, falls within a certain category of events for most people. And some people are being taken frequently and being used for reproductive purposes, basically. I mean, this is a level of violation that once you can face it, it's very disgusting. So, and you wonder how a higher order intelligence would do something like this. Well, are we dealing with a higher order intelligence? Because remember, technological skill and advancement does not denote anything regarding ethical development, spiritual development, or compassion. In fact, these forces seem to be lacking in compassion and feeling, as being described by the people they take. So this is a worldwide event now going on.
Yeah, they may have eclipsed the need for war and found some sort of functional peace, but it could be the peace of a prison.
Yeah.
And many reports about how they're internally organized, these extraterrestrial forces. It looks quite prison-like.
Yeah.
It looks like a hive mentality.
Yeah, and it's very hierarchical.
Right.
And so they're just following the dictates that they're given. In one sense, they're very clumsy because they don't really try to hide themselves that much. They just keep going with whatever they're doing. They don't adapt to us very much. They just keep going on their plan.
Right, and that's actually something we're going to talk about later regarding advocacy, because the intervention is immensely vulnerable and brittle, unadaptable to resistance. They're just not used to it.
Right.
In fact, in some of your early works, I was reading the other day how they can create such a kind of a force field of ignorance and denial about their presence in the mental environment, such that people don't look up to the sky, or if they look, they actually don't see what's right in front of them to see. There's such a force suppressing people's recognition and ability to see what's right there, that they can function almost behind this curtain, behind the stage, and yet they're not used to active resistance. They're not used to people getting up, speaking out, doing what we're doing right now, and
Right.
saying this is who they are, this is what they're undertaking in the world, and we want it to stop.
And that's right, and according to the rules of engagement, the rules of that in our local universe, this has been revealed to me, I didn't make this up. If the native people show resistance to your presence, you must withdraw. But there's so few people registering resistance. See what I mean?
Well, and this is partly why the intervention doesn't want people to vocalize resistance, because it actually might thwart their activities even beyond the world from other forces.
And it defeats
observing.
their purpose of gaining control of us through either persuasion or fear of failure. When people feel like they can't deal with it, they just want to go away from it. They don't want to deal. And then, or you have people who are being allured to it, being seduced, and there are people who are being discouraged. So allurement or seduction and discouragement are the two mental techniques that are used to keep people from visibly resisting them.
And so this is kind of on the emotional side of their impact. And I think for those watching, because there are a couple questions, such as, this is terrifying, what can we do? And we will get into that. But one thing is to firewall your own mind from these extremes of emotional response, which is blind hopefulness, just basically acquiescing to the possibility of an external salvation from an alien force.
That's right.
Or this kind of complete despondency and depression regarding humanity and human potential,
right.
that we don't even deserve the world, let them come. And so there are these two pits of dysfunctional emotional response on the left and on the right, and part of what we would advocate is people kind of buttress themselves and keep themselves on a center line where, okay, yes, there's a lot of error in the human family, but there's a lot of good, not to be ignored. And so we not to oscillate too far, into those extremes. So, but the emotional influence on people is pretty considerable, although very difficult to identify where and when it's happening. And I'd like to talk about why. A major area of how the intervention is influencing people is in what your work calls the mental environment, which is an environment of thought parallel to the physical. And so in this environment, thoughts, emotions are forces just like wind and rain and water and all of this in the physical, and they have a real impact on people. But they're very difficult to quantify, to measure. I don't think there's any scientific instrument we have that can. But the intervention is extremely adept at neurological influence over other forms of life.
That's right.
This is one of their weapons. This is the weapon that means they don't need any weapons. They don't even need to do any harm to us. And yet their pervasive influence in the mental environment is something that every person wakes up, experiences, and goes to bed and sleeps within without knowing it. And it's not to say that everything is created by the intervention, all mental disturbance, but it's real and it's powerful, and it comes in both a targeted and an ambient form. So I'd like to share a couple passages from some of your other works. This first one talks about the establishment of installations that can project this influence in the mental environment. The first bases were established in the oceans and shallow waters, away from the presence of human military forces, in the Arctic regions, and in areas where there is no military establishment. Bases underground, which are far more difficult to establish, have been built in mountain regions. Transmitters have been established in mountain regions, which have cities at their base. Transmitters to affect the mental environment and pacify the public. This represents one of the efforts of the intervention. So this is a bit difficult, because the person listening might say, oh, that's why I woke up feeling so depressed today. Or, that's why people are so aggressive on the roads these days. And I don't think that's really a safe association to make. Would you agree that?
Well, I mean, we create our own depression, and we are depressed about the facts of life, the realities of life, the disappointments in life. But there's a force, it's an amplifying factor, and it does two things. It either amplifies those kind of emotions, or it creates kind of a dissonance, which makes it harder for you to focus on things. You know, it tends to space you out a little bit, or just makes it, you feel kind of edgy, uncomfortable. It's like if you had a splinter in your finger, it's not overtly painful, but it's enough to distract you. There can be things that can just distract us. So we're not very present. We're being affected by something. And this isn't happening everywhere. But this is how you make people more pliable, or you make them less responsive to your presence. They don't want to be known by a lot of people. Now, that may be changing because their presence is being viewed much more. There's been some revelations from the U.S. Navy of sightings, and it's been really important. They may want to become more noticed, but people are so obsessed or so overtaken with their conditions of life or their own interests, they just don't pay attention to these things. But somehow, when you go out into the world, people look much more edgy, they look much more impatient, they drive faster. You probably noticed this, it's in our country. They're less engaging. There's a level of stress. Now, this may be because of everything that's happening in the world today. You can't rule that out, certainly. But there's an element of this which is adding to it. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying we're at the effect of the intervention, everybody, but they can begin to affect us gradually over time, okay? If you're below our radar of understanding, you can infect us without us knowing it, okay? And so abductees suffer from this. They suffer from the sense that their lives have really been overtaken. It's not really their lives anymore. And so they try to make it a wonderful thing, a good thing, a helpful thing. But the people, I've met many of these people, and most of them look very kind of lost, not very inner-directed, despondent, you know.
I mean, I think for all those watching, if you look back 10 years, how did the world feel 10 years ago relative to now? I think most people watching would probably say really different, like a lot different. And post-COVID, very different as well. You know, so this isn't all as a result of the ET presence, but it's just important to understand that there is a force in the world that possesses the technological and psychological abilities to introduce thoughts and emotions and impulses into the human psyche broadly and at an individual level, but also to turn up the volume on our own internal dissonance. You know, it's almost like the static on that radio station. They can just turn the volume up on that and just drown out the more intelligent voices within our own experience.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I think you do see people struggling to even recognize how to deal with the basics of life. People are falling off, falling through the cracks. Massive world issues are not being dealt with intelligently. People don't have the psychological bandwidth for it. And there is a force in the world that wants to make sure that that continues.
That's right.
Because that serves their ends.
That serves their ends. And this brings up a really important part of my teaching, because much of my teaching is spiritual teaching, and it's anchored in the idea that we have a deeper intelligence within us. And an innate intelligence, a permanent intelligence, not an intelligence that we have developed from childhood and through world exposure and education, that has the ability, it's immune from this kind of influence. The part of us that's our personality, that's our thoughts and beliefs, and our activities and how we're in time and we're fully engaged here, that's the part of us that can be dominated by many forces, even other human forces. But there's a deeper part of us that cannot be influenced, cannot be subjected to influence. And this is very important, because the more you become anchored there, the more you become immune to forces in the mental environment, and you're able to see things around you you couldn't see before. Either you didn't want to see them, or you just didn't have the eyes to see them. You didn't have the eyes to hear things, and you're now hearing. You begin to open up your senses. You begin to have a more complete experience of life, which is a very beneficial thing overall. You become more sensitive to things that you were never sensitive to before, which can be kind of difficult in dealing with trauma and the realities of war and conflict and what's going on in the world. But you're able now to see and know things that just weren't possible before. You were a person who lived on beliefs and assumptions. And beliefs and assumptions are easily manipulated, not just by an intervening force, but by commercial forces like every minute of every day, government forces, religious forces. I mean, we live in a sea of influence in the world, in the mental environment and in the physical environment. So these things affect us subtly and often in profound ways, very demonstratively. So they're just using what we have, and they're turning up the dial on certain things which they're skillful at. They know nothing about our world. They know nothing about how to live here. They don't know how to grow food here. They don't know, I wouldn't know how to survive here.
Yeah. Well, part of their end game seems to be to integrate us into their collective, so that there's a component of their collective that's native.
Native.
They actually know everything about this place.
Well, they know enough that they can survive here, and they're biologically organized to be able to function here. And so the promises of peace and wealth and stuff is so fallacious. It's just like, yeah, how are you going to do that? They're not doing any of that. So it's all narrative. But people want to believe, so they believe, and then you have people get together and reinforce each other's belief.
And like people could say, yeah, but what we're doing is narrative too. We're telling a story right now about an intervening colonizing force. True. The thing though is that this narrative is founded upon what is observed behavior in the world.
That's right.
Whereas other narratives about salvation, redemption, ancient aliens coming to, come back and steward us because they're the fathers of this race, or things like that, is not built upon the behavior of those in our world now.
That's right.
And so I think that's important to establish, that yes, there are narratives, there are ways of seeing. Nobody knows what's in the mind of these beings completely, right? But we have to start to piece together a picture, a working picture for ourselves and collectively that will enable us to respond to who's in our world. And it has to be built upon observed behavior.
That's right.
And there is a ton of behavior that we can observe.
That's right.
Including the behavior that they are not disclosing that they're obviously engaged in. The whole secrecy industry, that surrounds them and that they're involved in. So I do want to go back though to what you talked about regarding the spiritual mind, because people might say, okay, wow, so you're going to protect yourself from this psychic influence in the mental environment using a spiritual solution. But I think what you're getting at is that this spiritual mind is actually a part of our complete intelligence.
Yes.
And we're living in like the top 2%. We're buzzing around on the surface of life, as we do, as we have to, with family, careers, and things like that. And that's fine. But the problem is that at that 2% depth, we can easily be influenced. It's like the influence penetrates that easily. Yes. But if you go down multiple levels in your own intelligence to this spiritual intelligence that really represents a whole aspect of who you are, not only can you start to see, not only does it start to calm your mind and your mental agitation, but it actually provides what you could call a complete barrier to mental intrusion. And so I think it's a difficult thing for folks who see the reality of what we're talking about, and then the answer is this spiritual development. It almost seems like there's
it's not the only answer, but without it, we're belief bound, and if you're belief bound, you could be manipulated. If you're living on assumptions and beliefs, you can be manipulated not just by alien forces, but by human forces, by everyday forces. And to get centered in yourself is critically important. In fact, without that, you're not going to prepare for living in the universe. You're just going to be a weak race that just gets overtaken and utilized by someone else. So the spirituality of the universe is about knowledge. We call this knowledge, because the power of knowledge is in all intelligent life. It may not be expressed or even known in various races, various worlds, but this is what all sentient beings carry within them. We carry it within us. That's why we have art, that's why we have music, that's why we're creative, that's why we have great humanitarian efforts in the world, despite the gravity of our errors. I mean, we carry this power within us. It's very latent in most people, and the intervention can't control it. Yeah. So you become beyond their reach in a way. You can't be fooled, you can't be deceived, you can't be glossed over, you can't be distracted. And you don't do that to yourself, you don't distract it by anything else. This is This is what gives you power, certainty, and clarity in life. It's not just because we're facing intervention. This is at the core of what spirituality really is. It's not just having a big faith belief and hoping to be saved one day. It's about what are you grounded in within yourself that enables you to be strong, determined, and able to handle the kinds of flack and difficulties that life presents. So this is about how to be in the world as much as it is about how to prepare for the universe. The universe is a powerful mental environment, okay? The mental environment is used a great deal by forces competing with each other. If you can control someone's response, if you can control someone's motives by understanding their nature and how to plug into that part of their nature, you can affect how they behave in response to you. It's almost like a battle at a different level. It's not really a battle, it's more competition for power. So even in sports, there's a mental component to basketball teams playing each other, trying to, force the other person into thinking that you can't be overcome or they can be defeated one-on-one with you.
Or just trying to make the other team make a big mistake, and
Yeah.
that's how you score. I mean,
Yeah.
so much of scoring in sports is the other team shooting themselves in the foot.
Right.
And so I think this is on a grander level, though.
Yeah.
It seems like these intelligent forces that have been competing for who knows how many years out there have found ways to convert the energy and intention of their opponent into an energy that furthers their end,
Right.
without them having to enact that specifically.
It's how to gain control without destroying the environment. Blowing up worlds is just the stupidest thing you could ever imagine. A world like ours, are you kidding? This thing is so valuable. We have no idea how valuable that is to other races. And if it looks like we are going to destroy it and we're not going to change our behavior sufficiently or adequately, then it's a big sign for those who are aware of us, who have an interest in our world, to consider intervention. That's exactly what's happening now. That's why it's happening now. That, and again, the risk of nuclear war, which would destroy the value of the world. Maybe us too, but they're here at a critical time of vulnerability and change in the world. We're also changing the environment of the world, which is going to make it much harder for us to live here. They may not be so concerned about that, but it is a perfect time for intervention. Okay? So you got to get really real. This is life. Life is about competition. I mean, it's not just about, we know that. We know that animals and plants are competing with each other. We know that nations compete with each other. Hopefully not destructively, but competition is part of life. And if you want to make life something without competition, you're going to live in a dream world. You're going to live in your own little bubble.
Right. And you'll probably not last that long in the
Well,
universe,
you won't be
so.
successful in life.
Right. There's another thing I'd like to bring out, and that's, I think, affecting all of us. And again, difficult to quantify and identify exactly how, but I think the ET presence is distorting many, many aspects of social, cultural, and political life in the world. And of course, you can look out on the world and see how distorted it is presently. I mean, at a political level, let's just go there for a breath. It's immensely distorted. And then you go to social levels, the uprooting of all the norms of society, and young people just absolutely at sea about who to be and what to be a part of and what to do with their lives. There's so much confusion right now. And I think some of that, there are some natural trends at work, right? Societies, tribal societies are breaking apart, opening up. There is some sort of budding of a world identity, which I think is really important. And so we're all a little disoriented, but that there is this ET presence in the world with the actual ability to distort those very things. And then to see that distortion occur up on the surface of life, I think there's an association to make there.
Well, a good example of that is the very popular conspiracy theorists and theories that are going global now. And I mean, some conspiracy is important to reveal. It's innate corruption in governance. But a lot of it is a kind of process of disengaging you from authority figures, from leadership, from human life. And so now you become a person who's kind of shrinking because you can't deal with the world because it's so controlled and manipulated by a handful of uber rich people, and we have no choice. this is intervention. Intervention is controlling that kind of narrative. That serves their purpose.
It's almost like a psychological corralling. It's
Yeah.
like, when you corral an animal into a tighter and tighter pen, and it just doesn't know how to get out of those boundary lines. And you see people corral themselves frequently,
Yes.
basically saying, "Oh, I just can't trust anything in the mainstream." And it's like, well, some things in the mainstream are trustworthy, but you can't trust anything in the mainstream.
Yeah.
You have effectively corralled yourself.
Right.
And I am curious as to what force initiated that process.
Well, it could be cultural disappointment. It could be, the failure of personal idealism. All the grand notions of the past century about human unity and elevating the poor and increasing the quality of life around the world just is not happening. So that can be very discouraging. And what's happening to the environment is very discouraging. So, but now we have an actor in our midst who's going to really take advantage of this for their own purposes. Yeah. The more lost you are, the more easily you're going to turn to some other power. You're going to turn to some other power, to someone or something to believe in. You need something to believe in. People need something. I don't care what they tell you. They may say, "I don't believe in anything." No, they do. You're going to believe in something. So once you've been divorced or forced into being divorced from people, places, and things that are the norm, now you're going to associate with something else. It's perfect for the intervention.
This is one of the intervention strategies,
Exactly.
which is you debase native social, political, and even psychological norms and institutions such that a native person wouldn't want to associate to them. But now they're hunting. They're looking for something to associate to.
Right. They have a need to associate.
Yeah. It's natural.
It's natural.
We are social creatures.
Right. And this happened in colonial times too, where the native peoples would be discouraged from following their medicine man or following their leader because these leaders were corrupt or they were violent. And now we're going to offer you new technology. We're going to give you new things to do. You can have new experiences. Promise, 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 right? But it broke down native culture. If you stop believing in your leader, even if they're corrupt or your medicine man or the norms of your tribe or your group, then you're at sea in a world not knowing where you belong. And I think that disassociation process is a part of the intervention. It's subtle. It's not the only force disassociating us. It's not controlling everything. But it is a factor. It's an element in our environment. And so they're playing the long game. They're not trying to win us all over in the next 5 or 10 years. In fact, they're waiting till we become so broken down that they can appear to us and say, "We're here to save you and we can do it." And at that point, people will believe because they have no other option. Right now, they would be resisted, they'd be feared. "Who are you? You don't belong here. Who are you? I didn't invite you here. Get out of here." But if humanity breaks down enough, and hopefully it doesn't blow up the world in the process, we make ourselves extremely vulnerable to an alien presence presenting itself.
Right. If the desperation is sufficiently high,
if you lose hope,
out the door.
If you lose hope, you're going to go with anything you think is going to save you.
Yeah. So part of our message here for folks listening is, if you're on the ET bandwagon, the pro-ET bandwagon, please consider getting off. Don't get on if you're not on, and stay on humanity's side in all of this.
Absolutely.
And don't fall off the cliff of hopelessness regarding humanity and human potential.
We're going through very pivotal, very difficult times, which will be necessary if we're going to actually improve human society in the future. You're not going to just improve it by making little adjustments here and there. You're going to have to break certain things down and build certain things back up in a different kind of way. So we're going through a breakdown process, but that's life. That's in your own natural development. You've gone through periods of your life where you were kind of breaking down. You were letting go of things in your life. Things were falling away from you, perhaps, so that you could have an opportunity to choose again and have maybe a new opportunity or new outlook. So I don't look at decline as the total end game. It's dangerous if it's continued. But this is a time for people to really open their eyes to much bigger things that are much more important than the things they have been concerned with or preoccupied with. The well-being of the surface of this world for habitability, critical importance. The cessation of war, critical importance. And we have to deal with the alien presence in the world today. If we don't, it will erode us away over time. It will take advantage of every failure we have to strengthen itself here. It will do it without the use of force. It will do it without proclaiming itself. It will do it sort of behind the scenes enough that most people won't even think about it. It's not even an issue for them.
All right, so in the time we have, there's so much more we could get into on this topic of how the ET presence is impacting us. I think it's important to talk about personal response.
Mm-hmm.
And there are questions simmering out there on, okay, what do we do about this? And another question here, I'll read it. Is it that we collectively have to learn about our mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual energy and how to handle it? Good question. And yes, I think so, but I wouldn't recommend that we compartmentalize ourselves necessarily along those 4 different lines. So it's not like there's a program for emotional strengthening and a program for mental strengthening. I think there's a pathway to strengthen your whole self. And I think Marshall and I, we want to get into that now. So I'm going to put up on the screen here the 4 areas of personal response that we'd like to talk about. So we have awareness, we have education, preparation, and advocacy. Now, we're not going to have enough time to go into all 4 of these deeply. We're going to focus mostly on the awareness. But later on, in a later gathering or event broadcast, we'll talk more about the others. But awareness, let's talk about that. And I think people are becoming aware or starting to, but I think there's even more. Beyond just being aware of the intervention, there's more to this. And one thing we talk a lot about is developing what we call a greater community perspective, which is a perspective on humanity and this world by looking from without. So instead of being within the world and trying to have a perspective on what we are in the universe, where we're going, it's to have a vantage point from beyond the world looking down upon it. So what do you think about that, Marshall?
Well, I think that's very important. Otherwise we're just tribal people trying to survive in a world that seems to be failing us, and we're failing it. A greater community perspective sees us in an evolutionary progress that's meant to take us into life in the universe. That's our destiny. It's not like we're going to try to hold out here on Earth and not ever have contact. No, meaningful contact is important. We're just not ready for it. What we're having now is destructive contact, which is here to take advantage of us. But our goal here is to prepare us to be people who begin to think like we're living in a greater community rather than just in one nation or one world. And we have to start to think about dynamics of that and what it could mean for organizing humanity and actually rescuing us from our own tendencies of being really destructive with ourselves, with each other, and with our environment. We have to save the environment. We're not going to have much to live on in the future. Our children are going to really pay for it, the errors that we're making today in that regard. So that makes you obviously a person very concerned about the quality of life physically on the planet, its sustainability. How can we make our life more sustainable, less damaging to the world? Because our children have to live here. We're going to have to live here. And to know that the universe out there is not just there for our taking. Habited worlds are owned by others, probably much more powerful than we are. But we have to also protect this world because it is of value to others. Not lots of others, but certain other races and powerful forces look at our world with envy and desire. So we have to find a way now to get organized in our own thoughts to realize that we need to be a force of opposition to that. You have to oppose certain things in life. You're going to have to. One-on-one with people, maybe on larger scales in society, maybe between nations, you're going to have to oppose certain things as well as promote certain things. And right now people are too checked out or too ambitious regarding the alien presence in the world, which only has one agenda. People like to think, well, there's different groups here for different purposes, and some are here to help us, and some are here to use us. But what I want you all to know is nobody should be interfering in human affairs at our stage of evolution. The Theology of Humanity briefings make this very clear. You are not ready for ethical, positive contact. And it may be quite a while before you are. You have to get your own house in order before you can engage with life in the universe. And we are really challenged with doing that, and we have not done that yet. So whoever is here to take advantage of us. You've got to know that. If you think otherwise, you're going to be living blind. And you're living in your desires. You're living in what you want. Because that's not how the intervention is functioning. It's not what it's doing. It's not connected to reality. So the fact that we are not ready for contact should solve that problem, because we have to get our house in order. And that's going to be a very tall order. And many people are not committed to that. So we're here in this world, every one of us, to make a difference, to do something beneficial to others. Not that it's because it's a thing we love to do, but it's a thing that we feel we can do, and feel this is coming from knowledge we're really motivated to do in service to others. It's all about service in the world. Really, that is the spiritual path. It's not about ascension. We're all going to ascend. Hopefully not tomorrow.
So,
So,
no one's quite ready for that. So what stands out here to me, Marshall, is the importance of having a working conclusion about who is in the world, about the nature of this contact that's occurring, and to get out of the confusion and the what ifs and the gray zone of good and bad, and maybe it's both, and see, oh my gosh, this is first contact with an aggressive other form of life. And there is a response, an opposition that's needed in response to that.
And the stronger that opposition, the harder it is for this presence to achieve their goals of gaining control of the world without the use of force, through human acquiescence or human depression.
Yeah. So with a working conclusion, not to say it's never going to change. I think everyone needs to keep updating their conclusions based on life and what's evolving in front of them. We can start to talk about individual response. Individual response. So what would the person do? And I think there's a couple areas of action, but one I'd like to put out first and foremost, because I like to start with both the obvious and the essential, is I think people really have to get their lives in order before they start focusing on this topic, this event, and trying to do anything about it.
Yes.
Like you said, life is life. Nature is nature. This intervention is an event of nature happening in our midst.
That's right.
It's a mental environment event, but there are other mental environment events happening. So our response to those would be the same as to the intervention itself. And so, I mean, to get our health in order, our affairs, our work, our providership, our family life, whatever it is that's undermining us. And, a lot of people do suffer with a pretty weak foundation in life.
Yes.
And so,
Truly.
and they might rush to this as some sort of escape from worldly concerns, some adventure in consciousness that they can get absorbed into, full of fascinating mysteries and possibilities. And I think it's time to let that fog dissipate off the land. It needs to get clear now.
Yeah.
And if it's going to get clear, it's going to reveal action to take. But action requires strength. And I think building personal strength is a huge first step for people.
It is, and I think because of the nature of change in the world today, while we're seeing how we can build strength, you build strength by getting things done, by doing things you wouldn't do before or couldn't do before, by overcoming resistance to take care of and resolving things that have been unresolved. But we also we have a chance to learn about the reality of the greater community and about something that's going on, this presence in our world today. I think that education is so rare, and we have a part of it. I'm not saying we have all of it, but we have a part of it that I think is crucial. And it's unambiguous, it's very clear, everybody doesn't get what they want from it, which never happens in life anyway, about things that are real. But it's an opportunity for us to get engaged with a larger movement of things while we are building strength in our own affairs. What we call the 4 pillars of our life: our relationships, our work, our health, and our spiritual development. Like the 4 legs of a table. These are upholding our life, and our life is only as strong or balanced as the weakest of those pillars. So I have a very broad approach to spiritual development. It's only one of the pillars: health, work, relationships. Any of those are neglected, your life's going to be unstable, you're going to be suffering, you're not going to be doing as well as you could. So, but you can't just neglect the world while you take the next 10 years out of your life to work on that, because you're also here to be engaged in the world to a certain extent. But I think regarding this bigger reality, It starts with awareness and education. And you can't get this education at a university. What I'm presenting to people, you may not be able to get anywhere that I'm aware of.
And
in the
when you
world
say
today.
the education, you're talking about the education about life in the universe
Yeah.
through these series of revelations
Right.
that have come to you.
And about the nature and the reality of the intervention happening in the world today. It is understandable.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, we'll never understand this. Ridiculous. Of course you'll understand this. It's intervention for one purpose. It's being carried out by very subtle means that are a little hard to understand. You know, you got to know when you're facing an adversary, that is an adversary. You can't make it anything else. It is what it is. And all of humanity is facing this adversarial presence.
Yeah.
It's not here to destroy us, but to use us. So
we have the awareness. We have the awareness about the intervention.
Yeah.
We have education about life in the universe
Yes.
and the state of the world.
And the state of the world.
And then we have preparation in one's own life at the level of these four pillars: health, spirituality, relationships, and spiritual development.
Right.
So where does it go after that? What comes next in the process?
That's a huge order, what you just said. If you're going to take on that much things, you're going to be doing a lot of work. You're not going to have time to suffer. You're not going to have time to be ambivalent. You're not going to have time to feel sorry for yourself. You can rest and have enjoyments, but you are taking on a big task, and I think that's very redemptive. So God gives you something important to do. That's how you escape the morass, the endless morass of your own suffering and predicament. Life gives you something important to do. This is important to do. If you want to be a part of something really big in the world, you do have to get your life in order. You cannot neglect that. There's no escaping that. But you also need to know that you're connected to something bigger. And if life in the universe has your name on it, if you're somehow connected to this, and many people are, natively, or other people have a strong interest or strong feeling, that's important. But you've got to take care of, have your feet on the ground. You can't just have your head in the clouds. So you've got to really build your awareness on both of these levels right now. Right. And that's a tall order. But you know, from my perspective, I mean, that's how your life really comes together. You don't just do one fun thing and your life comes together, or have one special event and your life comes together. No. You build for these things and they happen. And because you have knowledge within you that can guide you increasingly, it will provide you a sense of direction. It will correct you when you're about to make a mistake. It is the thing that's going to keep you connected to what you're really here to do, see, know, and do.
So this is a bit of another shocker for folks, I would suspect, because a lot of people who are interested in this topic were hoping for something a little more exciting, a little sexier, you know, something juicy and something a little more thrilling. And what you're really advocating is it's back to the fundamentals of being alive in the world. It's like, what kind of a life form are you? Are you stable, productive? Are you in control of your own mind?
Right.
Are you in control of the influences that are coming into your space? Are you strong enough to provide for other life forms, meaning friends, family, those around you? Like, it comes back to the fundamentals of being a living being in the universe, making contact with other living beings in the universe who are much stronger than us in some ways and not in other ways. So there's almost like there's a prosaic level to this that I think is important. Yeah. And I've used the word astro depression in the past to denote how discouraging it might be for people to see the universe, oh, it's nature, it's competition, it's not all what I wanted it to be. And the course of action required is to be a stronger person, a stronger life form. But it makes total sense.
Of course it does. That's life. And you know, this is what redeems people. To be really connected in that way to yourself, to your own needs, being responsible, and it's a tall order. I mean, if you're way behind in your life, it's going to take a lot of energy for you to get things straight and start moving again. But it's for this purpose, so you can be in the world in a bigger way. Otherwise, you're struggling, but for what?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just to have a little bit more money or have a little bit better job or have a few more friends or take a longer vacation. I mean, your heart and soul are probably yearning for something bigger. And I think that should be nurtured. But what I'm presenting to you is a functional spirituality. This is where you connect mind, body, and soul, is by working through all these channels to get yourself grounded in the world and to become a person in the world who's service-oriented and engage with what's happening in the arena that you're meant to be engaged with. You can't be engaged in every reality. So where does your energy need to go? And for some people, this whole issue of life in the universe, humanity staying at the threshold of a universe full of life, intelligent life, a greater community of life, is very compelling. For other people, it can be anything. It can be the environment, it can be social welfare, it can be political justice, anything. But it's got to be something that draws you in to be of service and not be a destructive force in the world.
Right, all right. And amazingly, building this kind of foundation, though it is mundane, and it is not that you could say new, it is the thing that will protect you from the intervention.
Excellent.
Because not only does it make you a very poor subject for whatever they're doing, because you've got your will in order, you've got your willpower in order,
right.
Your mind is your own, you're a strong individual, you're well connected to others, but also with some proximity to this knowing mind, this deeper aspect of intelligence, you have essentially created a dome over your functioning self. And this form of influence is unable to penetrate that.
Yeah, you can't be persuaded, you can't be seduced.
So I think this is as far as we can go with it for now, but I think it's important to see this as a foundation, this awareness, education, and this beginning preparation. And then, of course, there's more. And your work expands enormously on what comes next.
It does.
Including how to secure your own mental environment and even foster a more conducive mental environment for oneself. So maybe that's something we can get into next time.
Yes.
So with that, we're going to start to close up. This is really good. Exciting to talk about these things with you.
Well, I'm really happy that everybody can join us today. I think this is really important in terms of coming to terms with being in the world at this time. We're all here for a purpose. We didn't wash up on the shore. It's not an accident we're here. But our purpose isn't just about how to be happy or how to be fulfilled. We're really a component of something bigger. We're really meant to be a part of something. It doesn't have to be bigger, but it has to be something that isn't just about us. The path of personal fulfillment is the path of disappointment and despair. It really is. There's never enough you can do for yourself to really get you beyond your own sense of inadequacy and sense of loss, that you aren't really connecting with what you need to connect with. So I think life itself is forcing us now to become aware, awake, and to become responsive, responsible, able to respond to some bigger things that are happening in our world that may have our name on it. We're not all responding to the same thing, certainly, but there are certain things that will speak to us very powerfully, not just once, not just occasionally, but on an ongoing basis. And the more you begin to connect with this power of knowledge within yourself, the more potent this becomes within you. And you're able to really see things much more clearly, and things that persuaded you or discouraged you before don't have that power over you anymore. You become powerful.
So there's some calling here to become an advocate
of
a cause for planetary survival.
Yes, that's right.
And I think that's a pretty big cause.
Yeah, and survival means we take care of this planet and we protect it from outside intervention. We are not ready for contact. I'm going to make this case, and it should not be happening. If it is, it cannot be trusted. It will divide and conquer us.
And yet at the same time, we are stepping into this larger universe of life.
That's right.
Humanity's emergence, as you call it. And that needs to be happening.
Yeah.
So even as direct contact needs to not be happening, something else needs to be happening in terms of us shifting into this larger environment.
And as you say that, no one in the universe is going to come and save us. We might be sent wisdom from the universe, like the Allies of Humanity briefings are giving us wisdom from the universe. We couldn't have otherwise. But it's all to strengthen us, not to make us believe in a foreign power. So we have to get over the sense that somebody's going to come and rescue us. That's so weak, so helpless, so hopeless. No, we have to take care of business here. But, everybody plays a part. Nobody's going to achieve this on their own. You play a part, you feel better about your life. You move in a true direction, you feel like you're going somewhere. This is innate.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have an answer for everything. Of course not. You don't know if it's all going to turn out. No. You don't know if the world's going to be far better because of what you gave, but it'll be somewhat better. Mm-hmm. And that's enough.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Marshall.
You're welcome.
Really important. And thank you all for joining us for this conversation. There's some important reading I'd like to send your way. I'll put this up on screen. The Allies of Humanity briefings and the 4 books of the Allies of Humanity briefings really outline what the intervention is, what it's doing, and what we need to do about it. It is the beginning of that response. And then Marshall's other works really take that further. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't read the Allies briefings, I encourage you to do so. They're up online for everyone to read. If you'd like to view more of Marshall's videos, follow him on Twitter, formerly Twitter, currently X, or Facebook or YouTube. The links are on screen for you right there. And with that, I'll say good night. Really good to be with you and good to share this conversation together. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. So take care.